The Nevada sun had a way of making everything look older. The hills, the wooden fences, even the air shimmered with heat like an invisible fire. Out on the edge of a small, forgotten town stood a stretch of dry land that the locals called the range. It wasn't much to look at, a few wooden targets nailed to posts, some empty bullet casings scattered across the dirt, and the faint echo of gunfire that never seemed to fade. That afternoon, a group of boys gathered near the fence, laughing and talking loudly. They were older, taller, stronger, louder, and in the middle of them stood Ethan Cole, a boy of 12 with a face too young for the world he lived in. His shirt was 2 sizes too big, his cap shadowed his pale blue eyes, and his hands trembled slightly as he held the rifle. It wasn't a real one, not yet, just an old .22 his father had left behind. The kind of weapon a man used to teach a boy patience. "Come on, Ethan," one of the older boys called out, smirking. "Show us what that big dream of yours looks like." Ethan nodded silently. He didn't talk much. He never had. Words got stuck somewhere between his chest and his mouth, tangled in a quiet stutter that other kids loved to mock. So instead of talking, he took a slow breath, raised the rifle, and stared down the sight. The world shrank until all that existed was the target, a rusty tin can balanced on an old fence post. Sweat trickled down his forehead. His arms trembled from the weight of the gun. He inhaled, held his breath, and pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the air and missed. The can didn't move. A burst of laughter erupted behind him. "Nice shot, soldier. You'll make the SEALs real proud, huh? Maybe try hitting the ground next time." Ethan lowered the rifle, his ears burning. He didn't look at them. He didn't have to. He could feel their smirks pressing against his back like knives. One of the boys, Mark Turner, the loudest of the bunch, stepped forward. "You talk big for someone who can't hit a can. Maybe you should just quit pretending, Ethan. Go home before you hurt yourself." Ethan said nothing. He simply walked over to the can, picked it up, and set it back in place. Then he returned to his mark, raised the rifle again, and loaded another round. The laughter died down a little. He fired again. Missed. The boys chuckled. "Give it up, range boy." But Ethan didn't stop. He fired again. Missed again. Reloaded. Fired again. Missed. Each shot was a failure, and yet each miss seemed to fuel him more than the last. His breathing steadied. The tremble in his hands slowed. His blue eyes hardened, reflecting not anger, but something quieter, something colder. By the time the sun began to fall, the other boys were gone, bored, tired, and certain they'd made their point. But Ethan stayed. He stayed until the world was nothing but dusk and silence, and his last bullet finally found its mark. The can dropped. Ethan exhaled, lowered the rifle, and stared at the target as if he couldn't believe it himself. Then he smiled faintly, a small, almost invisible curve of his lips, and walked toward the can. He picked it up, brushed the dirt off, and whispered, "That's one." That night, when he returned home, his mother was waiting by the porch light. Her face was gentle but tired, lined with worry. "Ethan," she sighed, "you've been out there again?" He nodded. "You can't keep doing this every day, honey. You've got school, chores." He cut her off softly. Dad practiced every day. Her face fell for a moment, and she looked away, swallowing hard. "Your father was a grown man, Ethan. He knew what he was doing." "So will I," Ethan said, walking past her into the house. In his small room, the walls were bare except for one photo, his father in navy blues, a smile sharp enough to cut steel. In his hand, the man held a badge, the SEAL trident. Ethan had memorized every detail of that badge. The eagle, the anchor, the trident itself. It wasn't just a symbol. It was a promise. He opened his father's old trunk at the foot of his bed. Inside lay the things that made his childhood sacred: a folded flag, a worn-out knife, a faded cap with navy stitched across the brim, and a small velvet box. Ethan lifted it gently and opened it. Inside lay the seal insignia, polished and heavy with meaning. He traced it with his finger, then closed his eyes. "I'll make you proud, Dad," he whispered. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Ethan was back on the range. The air was cold, the ground damp with dew, but he didn't care. He had his rifle, his target, and his will. Each morning became a ritual. Wait before dawn, run 2 miles, shoot until his hands hurt, and do it again after school. The misses grew fewer. The laughter faded. Weeks turned into months. The other kids moved on. Sports, games, distractions. Ethan stayed on that patch of dirt, chasing a ghost that only he could see. He studied old Navy manuals his father had kept, reading about focus, discipline, and breathing. He learned how to control his heart rate, how to shoot between beats. He learned silence, how to let it calm him instead of crush him. One evening, as he lay on the ground, aiming at a distant can under a purple sky, an old man appeared behind him, Mr. Hargrove, a retired sheriff who often passed by with his dog. "You're out here every day," the man said, leaning on his cane. "Most kids your age are chasing girls or playing ball. You're chasing cans." Ethan didn't look up. "I'm chasing something bigger." The old man chuckled. "You remind me of your father. He used to say the same thing." That made Ethan's trigger finger tighten slightly. "You knew him?" "Knew him? Son, I watched him grow up. Toughest man I ever met. But even he started small. You keep this up, you might just become something too." Ethan didn't answer. He took a breath, exhaled slowly, and fired. The can flew off the post. The old man nodded once, smiling. "Yep, you've got his aim now." When Ethan looked up, the man was already walking away, the dog trotting beside him, the sound of his boots fading into the wind. Ethan stood there alone, the rifle warm in his hands, the stars beginning to flicker overhead. He looked down at the ground, at the hundreds of shell casings scattered like pieces of time, and for the first time, he realized something important. He wasn't just shooting to honor his father. He was training to become him. That night, as he sat by the window, polishing his rifle under the moonlight, he could almost hear his father's voice. "Discipline, Ethan. Focus. Never stop when you're tired. Stop when you're done." And from that night on, done became a word Ethan didn't understand anymore. He ran harder, trained longer, ached more, failed often, but never quit. And somewhere deep inside, that small, trembling boy began to fade. In his place, something unbreakable started to grow. A seed of purpose, a hunger to prove himself, and the faint, rising shadow of the man who would one day shatter every SEAL record ever set. The Nevada dawn arrived like a quiet whisper, rushing the hills in soft gold. The range slept under a pale mist, the wind carrying the faint scent of dry sage and dust. Ethan Cole stood at the top of the hill, overlooking it, his hill, the same place his father used to bring him to watch the sunrise. He clutched the small SEAL insignia in his palm, so tightly that its edges dug into his skin. The metal was cold, but it made him feel alive, connected to the man he missed more than anything. His father had died when Ethan was only 9, but the memory of his voice was carved into his mind like scripture. Strength isn't about size, son. It's about heart, and heart never gives up. The wind picked up, tossing his hair into his eyes. Ethan looked toward the horizon, where the first light split the sky, and whispered, "I'll make you proud, Dad. I'll become a SEAL, no matter what it takes." It wasn't just a wish. It was a vow. From that morning forward, Ethan's life changed completely. He started waking before the sun, long before the other kids in town had even opened their eyes. He laced his worn-out sneakers, slung a small backpack over his shoulders, and began to run, across dirt roads, over fences, through open fields still heavy with dew. His lungs burned, his legs ached, but every step brought him closer to the man he wanted to be. When he wasn't running, he was studying not for school, but for life. He read everything he could about the U.S. Navy SEALs, their missions, their training, their discipline. He learned about Bud S., the grueling test that broke even the strongest men. He learned about Hell Week, where sleep deprivation, freezing water, and pain crushed souls faster than bullets. Most people would have been scared. Ethan was inspired. If they could do it, so could he. At school, however, nothing had changed. The laughter followed him like a shadow. Mark Turner, the same boy who mocked him at the range, was now captain of the football team. He and his friends never missed a chance to remind Ethan of how weak he looked. "Hey, SEAL boy," Mark called one afternoon in the hallway. "How's the kiddie range going? Still missing cans?" Ethan just walked past him. His silence made them angrier than any insult ever could. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Mark shoved him against the locker. Ethan's books hit the floor. His jaw tightened, but he didn't swing back. He simply picked up his books and said quietly, "You'll see." The words weren't a threat. They were a promise. That evening, while the others wasted time at the diner or arcade, Ethan was back at the range, alone. The sun bled into the desert, painting everything orange and red. He set up his targets, cans, bottles, even small pieces of wood balanced on stones, and started shooting. Bang, miss, adjust, bang, hit, bang, hit again. Hours passed, but he didn't stop. He kept pushing, testing himself, refining his aim. He learned to shoot lying down, kneeling, standing, even while running. He learned how to slow his heartbeat, how to breathe between shots, how to predict the wind. Sometimes his mother would stand by the back door, watching him in silence. She worried about him, about the obsession burning behind his calm face. One night, she finally walked out to the range, her hands tucked into her sweater. "Ethan," she said softly, "you can't spend every evening out here. It's not healthy. You're still a kid." He lowered the rifle, sweat dripping from his forehead. "I don't feel like a kid anymore, Mom." Her voice cracked. "You don't have to replace him." "I'm not replacing him," Ethan whispered, turning back toward the targets. "I'm becoming what he wanted me to be." She wanted to argue, to tell him that being a SEAL wasn't something you just decided to do, that it took more than willpower. But the look in his eyes stopped her. They were his father's eyes, steady, unflinching, full of quiet fire. So she said nothing. Years passed, and the world around Ethan seemed to shrink. Friends came and went. The laughter faded into whispers. People began to realize that the little boy on the range wasn't playing anymore. By 16, Ethan had transformed. The once scrawny kid was lean and hardened, his muscles defined not by gym weights, but by dirt, sweat, and grit. He trained like a soldier long before he wore a uniform, running in the heat, crawling through mud, swimming across freezing rivers, pushing himself past exhaustion. His days had rhythm. His nights had purpose. One afternoon, while running laps through town, he passed the local diner. Mark Turner and his buddies were sitting on the porch, laughing over milkshakes. Mark smirked when he saw Ethan sprinting by. "Still training for your imaginary SEAL badge?" He called out. Ethan didn't stop running. "Still talking?" He shot back without missing a step. The laughter from Mark's friends turned awkwardly quiet. That small moment, that one sentence, became the first time Ethan realized that his silence was his power. He didn't need to prove anything with words. His actions were louder. By 17, Ethan had gained a quiet reputation in town. The sheriff's old friend, Mr. Hargrove, sometimes invited him to shoot at the police range, just to see how good the boy really was. One morning, Hargrove set up a long-distance target, 800 yards away. "That's a tough one, kid," he said. "Even the deputies can't hit that." Ethan said nothing. He adjusted the scope, exhaled slowly, and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the valley, one clean sound that sliced through the wind. The bullet struck the bullseye dead center. Hargrove blinked, stunned. "Well, I'll be damned." He grinned. "You're not just good, son. You're scary good." Ethan reloaded. "Not yet," he said quietly. "But I will be." That night, after training, he climbed the hill again, the same one where he'd made his first promise years ago. The stars burned bright, and the town below was just a scattering of lights. He sat on a rock, breathing in the night air, holding the insignia again. He spoke softly, as if to the wind. "I'm ready now, Dad, for whatever comes next." He didn't know that whatever comes next would test him more than anything before, that his real battle wasn't against the boys who mocked him, but against himself. A week later, he received a letter from the U.S. Navy recruiting office. His application had been accepted. He was invited to preliminary assessments, physical, mental, and endurance tests. When he told his mother, she froze. "Ethan, this is real?" He nodded. "It's what I've been working for." Tears welled in her eyes. "You're so young." "What if?" He hugged her tightly before she could finish. "You told me once Dad believed in doing what you love, no matter how hard it is. This is what I love. This is who I am." That night, he packed his father's badge carefully into his bag. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Ethan stood on the same hill, his heart steady, his promise alive. He looked down at the range where it all began, the broken boards, the scattered cans, the ghost of the boy who once missed every shot, and smiled. Tomorrow, his journey would begin. But tonight, under the stars, he made one final vow. "I'll make them remember the boy they laughed at." The small Nevada town hadn't seen much excitement in years, but that summer, a buzz spread through the streets like wildfire. Flyers covered every pole and shop window. The Desert Warrior Challenge, a grueling endurance and shooting competition modeled after real military training. It was the same event Ethan's father had once conquered before joining the Navy SEALs. Veterans, police officers, and even a few Marines signed up. It was brutal. 10 miles of desert terrain, mud pits, obstacle courses, and precision shooting under time pressure. The prize didn't matter. It was the pride, the bragging rights, the chance to prove toughness under the scorching Nevada sun. And when Ethan Cole's name appeared on the sign-up list, people laughed. The diner buzzed with whispers that night. "Ethan Cole? The kid from the range? He's what, 18? Skinny as a broomstick. Guess he wants to embarrass himself in front of the whole town." Even Mark Turner, now working part-time at the hardware store, couldn't resist. "You hear about Range Boy?" he said to his buddies. "He's entering the challenge. Maybe they'll give him a participation ribbon for trying not to faint." But while they mocked, Ethan trained. Harder than ever. For months, he prepared in silence. He woke before dawn, sprinting across the same hills his father once ran. He built makeshift obstacles on his family's land, crawling through wire fences, dragging old tires, doing push-ups in the dirt until his arms shook. When his hands blistered, he wrapped them in tape and kept going. He remembered something his father once said, "The body quits long before the heart does." Ethan made sure his heart was untouchable. The morning of the competition arrived. The sun was just beginning to rise when Ethan stepped onto the dusty field where the starting line had been marked. Competitors stretched and joked, adjusting their vests and gloves. They were older, stronger, some with military tattoos running up their arms. Ethan stood among them in plain clothes, wearing nothing but a pair of worn boots and determination. A few turned to look at him. "You lost, kid?" One of the Marines smirked. Ethan shook his head. "Then you're in the wrong event," another said, laughing. "This isn't Boy Scouts." Ethan didn't respond. He simply tightened the strap of his backpack and checked the small rifle slung over his shoulder. A man in a camouflage cap stepped forward, the event director. "All right, folks? 10 miles, 20 obstacles, 15 shooting targets. You know the rules. Fastest time wins. Hydrate, pace yourselves, and don't die. Ready?" A horn blared. And the chaos began. The competitors took off like a storm of dust and adrenaline. Ethan started slow, steady. He knew the desert. He'd trained here. The others sprinted ahead, laughing as they passed him. By the first checkpoint, some men were already panting. The heat climbed fast, and the ground shimmered. Ethan's boots pounded rhythmically against the sand. He kept his breathing calm, his focus razor-sharp. The first obstacle came, a wall of stacked tires and wooden beams. The others scrambled, cursing and tripping. Ethan moved like he was born for it. He leapt, grabbed, pulled himself over, landing silently on the other side. The next section was a crawl under barbed wire. The ground burned with sun-baked gravel. Sweat stung his eyes, but he stayed low and pushed forward. His breath came in slow, controlled bursts, just like shooting. A Marine beside him grunted, "Damn kid's a machine." Ethan said nothing. By the halfway mark, half the competitors had already dropped out. The desert was merciless. The wind carried heat that scorched the lungs, and every step felt heavier than the last. But Ethan's mind wasn't in the desert. It was in the memory of his father, his voice echoing like a compass guiding him forward. Pain is the price of greatness. The second half of the challenge was the shooting range. Competitors had to hit 15 steel targets from various distances after running several miles. Most men's hands were shaking too much to aim properly. Ethan arrived, covered in dust, chest heaving. The instructor waved a stopwatch. 15 targets. Time starts now. Ethan dropped to one knee, exhaled, and steadied the rifle. Bang, first target fell. Bang, second. Bang, third, fourth, fifth. Spectators began to whisper. His rhythm was flawless, each shot landing perfectly, despite his exhaustion. The instructor's brows rose. Who the hell is this kid? The final shot rang out, a perfect bullseye. Ethan lowered the rifle calmly, the echo of the last bullet fading across the valley. When the instructor clicked the timer, his jaw dropped. Record time. He broke the standing record. Word spread fast. As Ethan neared the final stretch, a brutal uphill climb followed by a 2-mile sprint, the crowd that had come to see a show began to realize they were witnessing something else entirely. By the time he crossed the finish line, the crowd was silent. Dust clung to his face, his shirt drenched in sweat, but his eyes were steady, the same cold blue focus that had once trembled on the range. He didn't collapse or raise his arms in victory. He just stood there, breathing steadily, waiting for the results. Mark Turner was among the spectators, arms crossed, grinning smugly, until the announcer stepped up to the mic. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a new record holder. First place, Ethan Cole. The crowd erupted. Cheers, applause, disbelief. The same people who once laughed now shouted his name. Even the veterans saluted him with nods of respect. Ethan didn't smile. He simply looked up at the hills, the same hills where his father once stood, and whispered under his breath, "We did it, Dad?" After the ceremony, reporters and locals swarmed him. Everyone wanted to know who the mysterious young man was, the kid who beat Marines and soldiers. But Ethan didn't stick around. He quietly left the crowd, walking back toward his truck. As he opened the door, he noticed Mr. Hargrove leaning against the fence, grinning from ear to ear. "Didn't I tell you?" The old sheriff said. "You've got his aim and his heart." Ethan nodded, just following through on a promise. Hargrove chuckled. "So what's next, kid? You've already beaten the best in Nevada." Ethan looked out toward the horizon, his expression calm but resolute. "Next, I'm going to earn the trident." The old man's smile faded into something softer, almost proud. "Then God help the ones who try to stop you." That night, Ethan returned home with the trophy tucked under his arm. His mother was waiting on the porch, tears in her eyes. "I saw the news," she said, voice trembling. "You really did it." Ethan smiled faintly. "It's just the beginning." She hugged him tightly, the same way she had the day his father left for deployment years ago. "He'd be so proud of you, Ethan." Ethan's voice was quiet, but steady. "I know." After she went inside, Ethan stood alone beneath the stars. The desert stretched before him, endless, wild, unforgiving, just like the path ahead. He knew what came next wouldn't be easy. The Navy SEAL program was the toughest in the world, but he'd already proven something, not to others, but to himself. He wasn't the laughingstock anymore. He wasn't just the boy from the range. He was a man built from failure, molded by grit, and driven by a promise. As the wind whispered through the hills, Ethan looked down at the SEAL insignia hanging from his neck. The metal glinted faintly in the moonlight. He clenched it in his fist and whispered, "Next stop, Hell Week." The ocean was cold enough to steal a man's breath in seconds. Waves crashed against the California shoreline like thunder, and the night sky offered no mercy. On the beach, a line of recruits stood trembling, some from fear, others from exhaustion. It was Hell Week, the most brutal phase of Navy SEAL training, and it had just begun. Ethan Cole stood among them, drenched, sand sticking to every inch of his skin. His eyes were hollow yet sharp, a mixture of exhaustion and defiance. Around him, men whispered, groaned, or muttered silent prayers. Most were taller, stronger, older, Marines, Rangers, athletes. Ethan was still the kid. But after what he'd endured in Nevada, he had learned something most hadn't. Pain was a language, and he was fluent in it. "Get in the surf." The instructor bellowed, his voice slicing through the wind. The men charged into the freezing Pacific. The water swallowed them, biting at their bones. Ethan clenched his jaw and dove headfirst, the cold hitting him like a fist. When he resurfaced, the instructors were waiting on the sand, arms crossed, silhouettes outlined by floodlights. Link arms. Dozens of trainees locked together, forming a human chain. Waves slammed against them relentlessly, dragging some under. The instructors paced the shore, shouting over the roar of the surf. "Welcome to Hell Week. You'll be cold, wet, and miserable for the next 5 days. You'll sleep a total of maybe 4 hours, if you're lucky. You'll hurt, you'll bleed, but if you make it, you'll earn the right to call yourselves SEALs." The instructor's eyes landed on Ethan. "And some of you," he sneered, "won't last till morning." The first night was chaos. Recruits stumbled through obstacle courses in pitch darkness, their boots sinking in the sand. They carried 200-pound logs over their heads as instructors screamed inches from their faces. "Faster! You call. That teamwork? You want to quit? There's the bell." The brass bell stood at the center of camp, hanging like a silent judge. One ring and you were done. You'd quit, no questions asked. By midnight, 4 men had already rung it. Their faces were pale, eyes hollow, bodies shaking as they walked away into the dark. Ethan's muscles burned, his vision blurred, but he refused to stop. When the log pressed down on his shoulders, crushingly heavy, he grit his teeth until his gums bled. "Come on, Cole," growled his teammate Rodriguez. "You good." "Never better," Ethan gasped. He wasn't lying. He was in agony, but he welcomed it. Every ache reminded him of his father, of the long days at the range, of falling, missing, and trying again. He'd promised himself one thing. He would not ring that bell. By the second day, half the recruits were gone. Sleep deprivation set in. Their bodies trembled uncontrollably. Instructors ordered them to dig trenches on the beach, only to fill them back up, then crawl through them, and do it again. It was all a test, not of strength, but of will. Ethan worked like a machine. When the instructor shouted, he moved faster. When others slowed, he carried more weight. His quiet focus started to draw attention. One of the instructors, Chief Petty Officer Harlow, watched him closely. Harlow was a massive man, a veteran SEAL who'd been through real wars. His face was scarred, his eyes sharp as razors. He'd seen tough men break, but this kid was different. At dawn, when others were barely standing, Harlow barked, "Cole, you enjoying yourself?" Ethan looked up from the sand, breathing hard. "Yes, sir," Harlow smirked. "You like pain that much, huh?" "No, sir," Ethan replied. "I like progress." For a second, the instructor's grin vanished. Then he just nodded once. "Keep moving, then." That afternoon, a storm rolled in. The sky turned gray, rain pouring down in sheets. Visibility dropped to nothing, and the wind howled. The recruits were ordered back into the surf. The Pacific, now furious, tossed them around like rag dolls. "Hold the line." An instructor shouted, "Don't let go." Ethan's hands went numb, his grip slipping as waves crashed over them. He could hear men shouting, choking, struggling to breathe. The chain began to break. One trainee let go and was swept away before rescue swimmers pulled him back. Ethan refused to break. He dug his feet into the sand beneath the water and screamed through clenched teeth, "Hold on." Somehow, his voice cut through the chaos. Others found strength in it. They tightened their grips, shouting back, "Hold on." When the instructors finally called them back to shore, every man collapsed in the sand. A few began sobbing. Some couldn't move at all. Harlow stood before them, arms folded. That's what it takes. Pain, teamwork, fear. Remember that. This is where boys become ghosts, and ghosts become SEALs. His eyes met Ethan's again. "You're still standing, Cole. Don't make me regret it." By the third day, Ethan was running on fumes. His body was a map of bruises and cuts. His hands bled through the bandages. His lips cracked from dehydration. But every time he felt himself slipping, he remembered his father's voice. Pain ends. Pride doesn't. They were ordered to carry inflatable boats to 150 pounds each over their heads for miles down the coastline. Ethan's team staggered, slipping on the wet sand. Every few steps, someone fell. "Get up!" Ethan shouted. "Come on, we're almost there," Rodriguez groaned. "Kid, you're insane." "Maybe," Ethan said, his eyes wild with fire. "But we're finishing this." When they finally reached the checkpoint, Harlow looked down at the group and said, "Team 4, best time." "Didn't think you'd pull it off." Rodriguez laughed weakly. "You can thank the crazy kid for that." Harlow turned to Ethan. "Not bad, Cole. Maybe you do belong here." The fourth night was known as the Grinder. It was a cement. courtyard covered in sand and seawater, a place where dreams went to die. Recruits were ordered to perform non-stop calisthenics, push-ups, flutter kicks, squats, jumping jacks, all under floodlights and constant shouting. The temperature dropped to near freezing. Their bodies trembled uncontrollably. Ethan's vision began to blur. His arms felt like lead. Somewhere in the haze, he heard the bell ring again. Another man quit, then another. The instructors circled them like wolves. "Anybody else?" they taunted. "Anybody tired of pain?" The bell's waiting. Ethan stared at it. The gold glimmered faintly under the lights. His muscles screamed. His mind begged him to stop. He thought of his father again, the day he left for his final mission, the promise he'd made to come home, the folded flag that came instead. That memory burned away the pain. Ethan slammed his hands into the sand, forcing himself up. "I'm not done," he shouted. The instructors stopped. Harlow turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "What was that, Cole?" Ethan's voice cracked, but didn't waver. "I said I'm not done yet, sir." For a moment, the world went silent, except for the ocean. Then Harlow grinned. "Good, because neither are we." When dawn finally broke on the 5th day, only a handful of men remained. They were covered in mud and salt, eyes hollow, faces gaunt. But when the instructors blew the final whistle, the survivors didn't cheer. They were too drained. Harlow stepped forward, scanning their faces. "Congratulations. You've survived Hell Week. From here on, it only gets harder, but now you know what you're made of." His gaze lingered on Ethan. "And you, Cole?" "I misjudged you." Ethan nodded faintly. "Wouldn't be the first time, sir." Harlow's expression softened. "You're your father's son, aren't you?" Ethan froze. "You knew him?" Harlow smiled just slightly. "We served together. He was a damn good man." Ethan swallowed hard, emotion tightening his throat. "He taught me everything." Harlow nodded. "Then he'd be proud. You didn't just pass Hell Week. You led others through it." As the sun rose over Coronado Beach, Ethan stood in silence. He wasn't the little boy on the range anymore. He was something new, something forged in fire, pain, and salt water. But he also knew this was only the beginning. Because while others saw a victory, Ethan saw a door. And on the other side of that door was something waiting, something darker, harder, and destined to test him more than ever before. The real battle hadn't even begun. The night was black as ink, the wind slicing across the beach like a razor. Ethan Cole lay flat on the sand, the frigid water lapping at his chest. His body trembled violently, not just from cold, but from sheer exhaustion. 5 days of Hell Week had pushed him to the edge, yet the instructors weren't done. A loud whistle pierced the darkness. "Rise!" The command echoed like a gunshot. The remaining recruits scrambled to their feet, chattering teeth and shaking muscles protesting every movement. "Tonight," the instructor yelled, "you'll crawl the surf and carry a log for 3 miles. No one stops. No one complains. You want out? There's the bell." Ethan swallowed hard. He could barely lift his arms. His hands were raw, covered in cuts and sand, his fingernails torn. His chest heaved painfully, and yet he didn't look at the bell. Not once. His eyes, cold and unwavering, scanned the shore. Pain ends. Pride doesn't. The memory of his father's voice rang louder than the crashing waves. The body quits long before the heart does. "Keep moving, Ethan. Keep moving." He gritted his teeth, lifted the log onto his shoulders, and began crawling. The waves hit him with unrelenting fury. Twice the surf knocked him off balance. His body slammed into sand and rock. His lungs burned with icy water, and his fingers, numb and cracked, struggled to grip the log. Around him, other recruits fell to their knees, gasping and muttering. some surrendering completely to exhaustion. Ethan's legs screamed, his arms were on fire, his teeth chattered, but he pushed forward. Step by step, inch by inch. He couldn't stop. Move faster, Cole. An instructor barked, pacing the shore. His voice was sharp as a knife. Ethan obeyed, ignoring the burning in his body. His vision blurred, and his mind began to slip into a haze. Memories of missed shots, taunts from the range, and every failure from his childhood merged with the present struggle. All of it has led here. He slammed the log down momentarily, gasping. Water poured into his mouth. Sand burned his eyes, but he forced himself up again. Step, step. Somehow, he became untouchable. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time was meaningless in the dark chaos of Hell Week. Recruits collapsed one by one. Ethan was now surrounded by moans, groans, and desperate cries for mercy. But he pressed on, fueled by something deeper than physical strength, determination. Then it happened, the wave that could have broken him. A massive swell rolled in, towering above the recruits, and slammed Ethan face first into the water. His body was dragged beneath the churning sea, the log crushing him. Panic clawed at his chest, and he fought to resurface, spluttering and coughing. For the first time, fear cut through his focus. And then he saw it, the insignia his father had left him, tied tightly around his wrist. The metal glinted in the faint moonlight, a small anchor of certainty in the chaos. Ethan's lungs screamed. His arms were shaking uncontrollably. Every instinct screamed to quit. But something roared inside him, raw, unyielding, and unstoppable. Not today. Not ever. With a guttural roar, he kicked, twisted, and surged back to the surface. Every muscle in his body burned, every nerve screamed. He grabbed the log again and continued forward, moving faster than anyone would have thought possible. By the time the instructors finally called a halt, Ethan was half drowned, completely exhausted, covered in bruises and cuts. His body was trembling violently. Some men were crying outright, unable to move. Others had simply dropped the log and sat silently in the sand, broken. Ethan, however, still stood. Chief Petty Officer Harlow stepped forward, his massive silhouette looming over the weary recruits. His eyes scanned Ethan's face, narrowing as he took in the ragged, determined expression. "Cole," he said, voice low, almost approving. "You've got the heart. Not many make it this far." Ethan's lips cracked into a faint, exhausted smile. "Yes, sir," he managed to whisper. Harlow's gaze lingered. "You didn't just survive, you led. Even the strongest men around you are following your pace. That's something special." Ethan swallowed hard. I want to finish what I started, sir." Harlow's expression softened. "Your father would be proud." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Pride, grief, resolve, all blending into one raw, unstoppable emotion. He wanted to speak, to shout, but his body refused. So he nodded and let the silence speak for him. The next day was mental warfare. Recruits were pushed to navigate the surf and sand in pitch-black darkness, with only a faint flashlight to guide them. Instructions were shouted from 50 yards away. The rules changed mid-task. Sleep deprivation had turned minds into fragile glass. Ethan's brain begged him to quit. Every thought screamed, "Stop, sit, rest," but he remembered his father's lessons. Every failure, every ridicule from the Nevada range, every missed shot was a reminder. This is what it means to keep moving. He pressed on, carrying not only his own burden, but silently motivating the others behind him. "Keep up," he shouted through chattering teeth, echoing through the waves. Some began to follow. Others were dragged along by sheer force of will. By the end of the exercise, Ethan had become more than a recruit. He had become a symbol of endurance. Harlow watched silently from the sidelines, a hint of pride in his eyes. "The boy is unstoppable," he muttered under his breath. By the fourth night, the final trial approached, the endless obstacle course. Recruits were ordered to climb, crawl, and swim in a loop until their bodies nearly collapsed. Time was irrelevant. Only survival mattered. Most men were already broken. Every step was agony. Ethan felt his knees buckle under him. His arms refused to lift him over the walls. Every inch of his body screamed for relief. And yet, he refused to yield. He pictured his father, young and determined, walking through the same challenges decades before. He imagined the gun range, the cans, the laughter, the mockery he endured. He imagined the promise he had whispered to the hill years ago. Step by step, push-up by push-up, Ethan continued. When an instructor shouted, "Give up, Cole," Ethan didn't flinch. "Not today, sir," he whispered. By dawn, the course was complete. Only a handful of recruits remained. Many were physically present, but mentally broken. Ethan, however, staggered to the final checkpoint with bruised skin, bloodied hands, and lungs burning with every breath, but he was standing. Harlow approached him again, his massive frame casting a shadow over the boy-turned-man. "Cole, you didn't just survive Hell Week," he said quietly. "You dominated it. Most men break long before this point. You made it look easy." Ethan swallowed hard, blinking against the rising sun. I just kept moving, sir." Harlow smirked. "Keep moving. That's all it takes. That's the difference between boys and SEALs. That's why they'll remember your name." Ethan's lips cracked into a faint, tired smile. He looked at the surf, the hills, the sand, everything that had tested him, broken him, and rebuilt him. He understood, in that moment, that he had transformed. The boy who once trembled at the sight of a tin can had become something else entirely. Steel, focus, will, heart. And he knew this was only the beginning. Because ahead lay trials far greater than Hell Week. Tests that would challenge not only his body but his mind, and reveal secrets about his father's past that would change everything. But for now, Ethan allowed himself a single thought. I am standing. I have survived. And I will not fail. The training yard at Coronado was alive with motion and chaos. The sun beat down mercilessly, bouncing off metal obstacles and wet sand. Recruits ran, crawled, climbed, and lifted, every muscle straining to keep pace with the impossible schedules. Yet among them, one figure stood out, Ethan Cole. He had survived Hell Week, endured months of rigorous training, and now he faced the ultimate test, pushing beyond limits that had never been exceeded in the history of SEAL training. It started with the obstacle course. Recruits scrambled over walls, swung across ropes, crawled through mud pits, and dragged weighted sleds. They were timed, and their results were recorded for history. Ethan moved differently. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He flowed through the course, every step calculated, every leap precise. Where others faltered on high walls, he vaulted effortlessly. Where others stumbled through mud pits, he maintained speed and rhythm. By the end, he had set a new record, beating the fastest time previously held by a decorated SEAL. His instructors whispered in disbelief. Did he just? Yes, Harlow replied, voice tight with awe. He did. Next came endurance testing. The recruits were sent on a grueling 12-mile march, carrying rucksacks loaded with 50 pounds of sand, water, and gear. Most men struggled, feet blistered and lungs burning. Many dropped out. Ethan ran. Literally ran. He maintained a steady pace, pushing through pain most adults would collapse under. Every mile seemed to fuel him rather than weaken him. By the time the march was complete, He had not only finished first, but arrived nearly 30 minutes ahead of the next recruit. His fellow trainees stared at him in disbelief. Some muttered, "How is that possible? He's still a kid." Ethan didn't respond. He simply kept moving, head down, hands steady, eyes forward. Then came the water confidence test, designed to break even the strongest minds. Instructors threw fully clothed recruits into the turbulent surf, instructing them to swim miles in freezing Pacific waters while carrying a small boat and submerged weapons. Panic was the enemy, calmness the goal. Some recruits screamed, clawing at the waves. Some sank. Ethan moved like a shadow, gliding through the water with surgical precision. Every stroke was exact, every breath controlled. He navigated the waves with an awareness that seemed impossible for someone so young. Harlow watched from the shore, jaw tight. "That boy," he muttered. "He's not just surviving, he's mastering it." By the time Ethan and the last remaining men dragged the boat to shore, he had set another record, swimming faster, farther, and with better precision than anyone in the current class's history. But the record-breaking didn't end there. The marksmanship drills were next. Recruit after recruit fired rounds under pressure, while running, crawling, or submerged in water. Precision and speed were critical. The best scores ever recorded were legendary. No one expected a fresh recruit to touch them. Ethan stepped up, calm as ever. He loaded the rifle, took a slow, deliberate breath, and began. Bang. Target 1 down. Bang. Target 2. Bang. Target 3. Perfect. The instructors began whispering. "Wait. He's going faster than the record pace." Bang. 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 Ethan's rhythm was flawless, his movements fluid. He never missed. By the end, he had not only surpassed the existing score, but shattered it entirely, leaving every veteran in stunned silence. Harlow shook his head in disbelief. Records aren't meant to be broken that fast. He's rewriting the rulebook. Ethan's response was simple, a faint nod. His mind was already moving to the next challenge. The final test for the week was the infamous combat conditioning evolution, a combination of strength, endurance, and mental agility challenges. Recruits were pushed to their absolute limits, climbing 50-foot walls, swimming through freezing water, running obstacle courses with weights, and performing calisthenics until collapse. Most men collapsed long before the end. Ethan? He thrived. He lifted himself over walls that seemed impossible, ran faster than anyone else, and completed every obstacle with a precision that was terrifyingly exact. Even the most veteran instructors whispered among themselves. Where did he come from? One asked. From the range, Harlow replied. From the boy who never gave up. By the end, every record in the class was either broken or obliterated by Ethan. Not one man had kept pace. Not one came close. The other recruits looked at him with awe, disbelief, and fear, the kind that comes when someone demonstrates a level of excellence beyond imagination. Even the instructors were shaken. In the debriefing room, Harlow addressed the class. Gentlemen, today you've witnessed something extraordinary. You've trained hard, pushed yourselves, and learned discipline. But one recruit has done more than just complete the tests. He's redefined them. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Ethan Cole stepped forward. Ethan rose quietly. The room fell silent. Harlow handed him the record's binder. These are your results. Every record, every benchmark, every historical score, you've shattered them all. And you did it with control, focus, and discipline. Ethan nodded, not boasting. Yes, sir. Harlow smiled faintly. I've been through Hell Week. I've seen seals fall and rise. I've trained men older, bigger, stronger. You're something else. Remember that. Not many have this. Not many ever will. Ethan's heart pounded, but he didn't celebrate. There was no triumph yet, only a quiet satisfaction. Every record broken was a step closer to the promise he had made years ago, standing on a Nevada range, staring at a tin can, and whispering to his father, "I will make you proud." That evening, back at the barracks, Ethan sat alone polishing his seal knife. The words of the instructors echoed in his mind. Something else. Something rare. He remembered every failure, every miss, every laugh from the other boys back home. He thought of Mark Turner's mocking voice. Every insult, every doubt, every moment of ridicule fueled him. He had shattered records. He had proven himself beyond measure. And yet, there was more to achieve. The SEAL training program wasn't over. Deployment, missions, real-life scenarios, these were waiting. And while he had conquered the physical realm, the mental tests had only begun. Still, for the first time, Ethan allowed himself a moment to feel pride, a flicker of satisfaction. He had come so far from the boy who trembled at the range, the boy who missed every shot, the boy they laughed at. Now he was standing tall. The boy was gone. The man had arrived. The whispers would spread fast. By the next week, the legend of Ethan Cole was already reaching other SEAL units, veterans, and trainees. The kid from the Nevada range wasn't a kid anymore. He was a phenomenon. Some would envy him. Some would challenge him. Some would doubt him again. But he knew the truth. He was unstoppable. The world hadn't seen the last of him yet. And when the time came, he would shatter more than records. He would redefine what it meant to be a Navy SEAL. The sun had barely begun to rise over the Aegean coastline when Ethan Cole and his newly assigned SEAL team boarded the rigid-hull inflatable boat. The engines roared, tossing spray into the air as they sped toward the mission zone. Everything smelled of salt, fuel, and tension. For months, Ethan had trained relentlessly, shattered records, and earned the respect of every instructor. But this was different. This was real. Real danger. Real stakes. Real lives depended on their precision and discipline. The mission was classified. Intercept a small terrorist cell believed to be smuggling weapons across the region. Intelligence suggested the group had heavily fortified a coastal compound. Ethan and his team were tasked with infiltration, reconnaissance, and neutralization if necessary. Ethan's mind was calm, his breathing steady. He had trained for this moment for years, but training and reality were always separated by a razor-thin line. "Remember the plan," whispered Lieutenant Daniels, the team leader. "Silent insertion, secure the perimeter, gather intel, extraction at 0600. No mistakes. Move fast, move quiet." Ethan nodded. The weight of the trident insignia pinned. To his chest felt heavier than ever, a reminder of everything that had brought him here. The boat slid into the shadow of the cliffs. Ethan peered over the edge, scanning the blackened shoreline for signs of movement. The water was deceptively calm, but he knew the currents could pull them into disaster if they made a mistake. The team hit the beach silently, feet sinking into soft sand. Every sound was amplified, the scrape of boots, the slap of water, even the faint rustle of vegetation. Ethan moved like a ghost, muscles coiled and ready, eyes flicking constantly for threats. The other SEALs were skilled, but he noticed things, details that even veterans sometimes missed. A loose rock that could betray their approach. A faint shadow that indicated an open window. A barely audible hum of a generator in the distance. He filed it all away in his mind. The team split into pairs to recon the compound. Ethan and Corporal Reyes moved along the cliffside, crawling through tall grass and low shrubs. Every step was deliberate, every breath calculated. "Do you see anything?" Reyes whispered. Ethan shook his head. "Not yet, but stay alert. They'll be watching." Minutes stretched into hours. Finally, Ethan spotted a patrol moving near the fence, heavily armed, vigilant. Most would have panicked, but Ethan's years of training kicked in. He signaled Reyes to hold position, watching the guards' patterns, predicting their next steps. 3 seconds, Ethan whispered. "Move now." They slid through a shadowed gap, silent as the wind. Ethan's heart beat steadily. Fear was present but controlled. He was aware of every muscle, every noise, every possible outcome. Inside the compound, they discovered the weapon cache, crates of automatic rifles, ammunition, and explosives. Ethan's eyes scanned rapidly. This was bigger than anyone had imagined. He radioed back to the team leader. Confirmed. Weapon cache located. Recommend perimeter sweep before extraction. Lieutenant Daniel's voice crackled over the comm. "Copy, Cole. Proceed with caution. Extraction ETA 10 minutes. Ethan nodded, checking the perimeter. He noticed movement, a guard patrolling a second-floor window. Without hesitation, he scaled the wall with fluid precision, a shadow against the concrete. Within moments, the guard was silently neutralized and hidden from view. Reyes' eyes widened. "You're insane," he whispered. Ethan just shook his head. Efficient. Suddenly, alarms blared. Another patrol had spotted the team's presence. The SEALs snapped into combat mode. Gunfire erupted, echoing against the cliffs. Ethan fired with precision, each shot measured, eliminating threats without hesitation. Despite the chaos, he remained calm. Every decision was deliberate. Cover angles, suppression, extraction points. His years of relentless training, record-shattering endurance, and hell-week resilience had forged a mind capable of calculating outcomes under the highest stress. One of the guards attempted to escape with a radio. Ethan pursued, scaling a nearby wall and intercepting him mid-run. The guard froze, surprised by Ethan's speed. In 2 precise moves, the threat was neutralized. Ethan dragged the man behind cover and signaled Reyes. "You ready?" he asked. "Ready," Reyes said, barely catching his breath. Ethan nodded, then radioed Daniels. "Perimeter secure. Extraction point clear." The extraction was tense. Explosions in the distance signaled reinforcements, and every second counted. Ethan and his team moved like clockwork, loading crates of intelligence and securing the captured guards. On the beach, the inflatable boat awaited. Ethan's hands were steady as he carried equipment, eyes scanning the horizon. Every wave, every shadow, every sound was accounted for. They slid into the water, engines roaring, leaving the shore behind. The team exhaled collectively for the first time in what felt like hours. Daniels clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "Kid, you were incredible. Calm, precise, and fearless. You've earned your place here." Ethan just nodded quietly, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. Pride was present, but tempered by discipline. He had done what he trained for, not for recognition, but because it was his duty. Back on the ship, the debriefing was intense. Every action, every decision, every split-second choice was reviewed. Ethan's precision, awareness, and efficiency stood out, not just to the leadership, but to the veterans in the room. "You've got instincts most men would kill for years to learn," one senior officer said. "I've never seen a new SEAL operate with this level of control." Ethan listened quietly. Praise had never been his motivation. It was his discipline, his promise, and the memory of his father that had carried him through. Later that night, alone on the deck, Ethan looked at the ocean, stretching endlessly into darkness. The moon reflected on the waves, silver and cold. He thought of the Nevada range, of missed shots, of laughter, of Hell Week, of every challenge that had shaped him, and he smiled faintly. He wasn't just a recruit anymore. He wasn't the little boy on the range. He was a SEAL, a man forged from pain, fire, and relentless determination. And he knew this was only the beginning, because while he had survived his first mission, there were countless more waiting. Missions that would test him physically, mentally, emotionally. Missions that would demand the very best of him, the kind of performance that legends were made from. Ethan clenched his fists, the trident insignia glinting under the moonlight. I've come this far. I will go further. I will never fail. The next week, news of Ethan's performance spread among the SEAL units. Whispers turned into stories. Veterans who had seen decades of service nodded in respect. He had faced the real world, survived, and excelled. He had turned the impossible into routine. The boy they laughed at? Gone. The man who shattered every record, survived Hell Week, and dominated his first mission? Here. And there was no stopping him now. Months had passed since Ethan Cole's first mission. Each day had tested him in ways no training ever could. He had faced danger, adversity, and the sheer brutality of real combat, and survived. Every obstacle he had encountered in the SEAL training yard had been eclipsed by the real world. Yet he adapted, thrived, and pushed forward. Word of the kid from Nevada spread throughout the SEAL community. Veterans whispered his name in awe. Recruits studied his methods, trying to understand how someone so young could excel beyond anyone's expectations. Some were inspired. Some were intimidated. All were compelled to recognize the truth. Ethan Cole was no ordinary SEAL. He was a legend in the making. The next challenge came in the form of an international joint exercise, a simulated rescue mission, designed to mimic the most dangerous conditions imaginable. Ethan and his team were dropped into mountainous terrain, tasked with recovering hostages from a heavily fortified compound while avoiding detection and neutralizing threats along the way. Other teams had faltered in previous exercises, succumbing to exhaustion, miscalculations, or fear. Ethan approached it differently. His eyes scanned every detail: wind direction, terrain contours, enemy patterns, even the behavior of local wildlife. His mind calculated, predicted, and adapted faster than anyone else on the field. When they reached the first checkpoint, Ethan had already devised a route that avoided the main patrols entirely. His teammates moved with him, trusting his judgment implicitly. Every action was silent, precise, efficient. By the time they reached the compound, Ethan had positioned his team perfectly. Each SEAL had a calculated role, a line of sight, and a method of approach. There was no hesitation. "Remember the plan," Ethan whispered. "We move as one." Quick, quiet, effective. The assault was flawless. Ethan's movements were fluid, calculated, deadly. He neutralized threats with minimal exposure, coordinated suppressive fire for his team, and ensured no hostages were harmed. Every step had been rehearsed in his mind hundreds of times before, but he had the uncanny ability to adapt on the fly when unexpected variables appeared. By the time the exercise ended, the evaluators were stunned. No team had ever completed the scenario with such efficiency. Hostages were rescued, threats neutralized, and extraction achieved in record time. Harlow, now watching from the observation deck, simply shook his head in disbelief. He didn't just pass the exercise. He perfected it. Ethan's legend continued to grow. In the months that followed, he shattered every endurance and skill record at Coronado. Obstacle course times, shooting accuracy under duress, swimming with heavy gear, tactical navigation through hostile terrain, all of it had been redefined by him. Where previous records had stood for years, Ethan broke them again and again, leaving instructors and seasoned veterans astounded. But it wasn't just the physical feats. It was his mind. His ability to remain calm under fire, to read situations before they unfolded, to lead without hesitation. These qualities distinguished him as a rare SEAL, a true operator. Other recruits began referring to him as the Ghost, not for secrecy, but for the way he seemed to anticipate every move, appearing exactly where he needed to be, executing flawlessly and leaving no trace of struggle. Then came his first real-world mission. Intelligence had identified a high-value target in a remote desert compound. The operation required infiltration, intelligence gathering, and neutralization with minimal casualties. Ethan's team was handpicked for their skill and trustworthiness, but the mission's success depended heavily on his judgment. Landing under cover of night, Ethan led the team across jagged terrain. Explosives, sandstorms, and enemy patrols presented constant threats. Yet he moved like a shadow, silent and deliberate. Every choice was perfect, every risk minimized. They reached the compound without alerting the target. Ethan's tactical decisions ensured the team's safety while maximizing mission effectiveness. Every move was executed with precision honed through years of training, mental toughness, and an unyielding drive to succeed. By dawn, the mission was complete, a textbook execution that stunned higher command. Ethan's team returned safely, the target neutralized, and intelligence gathered that would prevent countless lives from being lost. Upon debriefing, Ethan was commended not only for his performance, but for his leadership. "Cole," Harlow said, eyes narrowing in admiration, "you've demonstrated what few operators achieve in decades of service. Your training, your instincts, your execution, it's beyond remarkable." Ethan simply nodded. Praise was not his motivation. His father's memory, the promise to himself, and the drive to push limits were what fueled him. That night, he walked alone along the ship's deck, staring at the ocean. The moon reflected silver across the waves. He thought of the little boy back on the Nevada range, the laughter, the ridicule, the missed shots. And he smiled. "I've come farther than I ever imagined," he thought. "But I'm just getting started." Over the next year, Ethan continued to build his legacy. He trained new recruits, breaking down the toughest exercises into lessons of endurance, precision, and mental toughness. Veterans sought him out for advice. Even elite instructors admitted there was much to learn from him. Every record he broke, every mission he completed, every recruit he inspired, contributed to a story that was spreading throughout the Navy SEAL community, a story of the boy who had been laughed at, underestimated, and dismissed, who had now become a symbol of excellence, perseverance, and greatness. He had transformed from a trembling, ridiculed child into a man capable of feats that would be remembered for years. The culmination of his legend came during a joint exercise with international forces, the ultimate SEAL endurance and tactical evaluation. The course combined land, sea, and air challenges with extreme conditions designed to push even the most seasoned operators to breaking point. Ethan didn't just participate, he dominated. Every obstacle, every challenge, every test, he shattered the existing standards. By the end of the week, evaluators, instructors, and fellow SEALs were left in awe. Every record of performance, endurance, and skill was rewritten under his name. Harlow, standing among the observers, finally spoke. "You've done what no one thought possible. You didn't just survive or even excel. You've redefined what a SEAL can be. Your father would be proud. We all are." Ethan's chest tightened. Pride, gratitude, and remembrance swelled within him. "Thank you, sir," he whispered. But internally, he knew this was never about recognition. It was about the journey, the promise, and the relentless pursuit of excellence. Years later, the story of Ethan Cole would inspire generations of SEALs. The boy they laughed at on a Nevada range, the kid who missed every shot, struggled through training, and endured ridicule, had become a legend. He shattered records, survived the harshest conditions, and executed missions with precision that few could match. He was proof that discipline, perseverance, and heart could overcome doubt, fear, and ridicule. And every time he looked at the horizon, he remembered why it all mattered: the promise to himself, the legacy of his father, and the relentless drive to never stop moving forward. The boy on the range was gone. The legend was born, and the world would never forget his name.